If you thought Part 1 revealed everything about Apollo 13's production, you were wrong. What we didn't tell you were the budget battles that nearly killed the film, the controversial historical changes that enraged NASA insiders, and the dark secrets about what really happened during those zero-gravity flights. This is Part 2, where the facts get weirder, darker, and more controversial. From studio executives who wanted Tom Hanks fired, to the actress who was deliberately sidelined, to the one change Ron Howard made that actual astronauts called a betrayal, these 20 facts will shatter everything you thought you knew about this film. And the bonus fact reveals the single most disturbing cover-up in the entire production. Let's dive deeper. Universal wanted to fire Tom Hanks. Mid-production. Tom Hanks was already a two-time Oscar winner when Apollo 13 started filming, yet Universal executives seriously considered replacing him halfway through production. Why? Test footage showed Hanks looking older and heavier than they wanted for an astronaut. Studio heads panicked, claiming audiences wouldn't believe him as a physically fit space hero. What audiences didn't know, Ron Howard threatened to quit if they touched his star. He argued Hanks's gravitas was essential and that astronauts weren't Hollywood pretty boys. The standoff lasted weeks, with executives reviewing every frame, looking for reasons to replace him. Howard won by showing them footage of the real Jim Lovell, proving astronauts didn't look like movie stars. The irony cuts deep. The studio wanted to fire the man who would deliver one of his most iconic performances because he looked too real. 2. Kathleen Quinlan was given almost nothing to work with. Kathleen Quinlan earned an Oscar nomination for playing Marilyn Lovell, but the role was a fraction of what it could have been. The original script had extensive scenes showing her perspective, her technical knowledge, and her role coordinating family communications. Ron Howard cut most of it, reducing her to worried wife reaction shots. What audiences didn't realize, Quinlan fought for more substantive material, but was told the movie needed to focus on the men in space. She later admitted the role felt diminished, turned into 1950s housewife stereotype, when the real Marilyn Lovell was sharp, informed, and deeply involved in NASA culture. Test audiences apparently found her scenes too technical for a female character, so they were cut. A performance that earned Oscar recognition was actually the remnants of a much richer role that was systematically gutted because executives didn't think audiences wanted to see a woman understanding spaceflight. 3. The film completely invented the Mattingly subplot. The dramatic sequence where Ken Mattingly figures out how to restart the command module using minimal power is the film's climactic technical achievement. Inspiring, brilliant, essential to the story. It never happened. What? Audiences didn't know. The real Mattingly wasn't in mission control running simulator tests during the crisis. He was there, yes, but the montage showing him methodically solving the power-up sequence in isolation is pure Hollywood invention. The actual solution came from multiple engineers working collectively over hours of debate. But that's not cinematic. So the writers created a single hero narrative, giving Mattingly a triumph he didn't actually have. Gary Sinise's entire character arc exists to provide a satisfying redemption story for the astronaut who got scrapped from the mission. Real history was messy collaboration. The movie needed a lone genius having a eureka moment. Truth sacrificed for drama. 4. Bill Paxton clashed with Kevin Bacon constantly. The on-screen chemistry between the astronauts hides genuine friction. Bill Paxton and Kevin Bacon barely spoke off-camera. Paxton, a method actor, stayed in character and wanted intense emotional preparation before scenes. Bacon preferred loose, improvisational energy and found Paxton's approach pretentious. What audiences didn't know, their arguments became so heated that Tom Hanks had to mediate multiple times. During one particularly brutal shouting match in the cramped lunar module set, Paxton accused Bacon of not taking the role seriously enough. Bacon fired back that Paxton was acting for the wrong camera and making everything about himself. Ron Howard deliberately didn't intervene, believing the tension added authenticity to the cramped quarters stress their characters experienced. But crew members described the set as genuinely hostile whenever Paxton and Bacon shared scenes. The camaraderie you see on screen was the opposite of what existed behind it. 5. The zero-gravity flights caused permanent injuries. Those 600 parabolic flights in the Vomit Comet didn't just cause nausea. They caused lasting physical damage. Multiple crew members suffered herniated discs from the violent G-forces during the plane's climb and dive sequences. What audiences didn't realize, at least 3 crew members required surgery after production wrapped. The cameraman had it worst, trying to operate heavy equipment while floating, then being slammed back down when gravity returned. One camera operator shattered his wrist when he misjudged a landing during a dive. Another suffered a concussion when equipment broke loose and hit him mid-flight. The production's insurance costs skyrocketed as injuries mounted. Medical staff traveled with every flight, treating everything from broken fingers to severe vertigo that lasted weeks. Those 23-second bursts of authentic weightlessness came at a price measured in broken bodies and permanent damage. 6. Ron Howard, lead about historical accuracy to get NASA cooperation. Howard repeatedly promised NASA that Apollo 13 would be absolutely faithful to history to secure their cooperation and access. Then he immediately started changing facts for dramatic purposes. What audiences didn't know. NASA consultants were horrified when they saw early cuts. The film invented dialogue, created composite characters, and restructured timelines. When they protested, Howard claimed dramatic necessity and reminded them they'd already given approval. NASA was trapped. They'd invested their reputation in the film and couldn't publicly criticize it without looking foolish. So they stayed quiet while Howard delivered a movie that played fast and loose with facts they'd been promised would stay sacred. The technical accuracy everyone praises is surface level. The actual decision-making processes, the real contributions of dozens of engineers, the genuine timeline of events, all were altered or fabricated. NASA got played. They endorsed a movie that rewrote their own history. 7. James Horner's score was rejected 3 times. The soaring orchestral score by James Horner is now considered one of his finest works. Ron Howard hated it. Horner submitted 3 different versions before Howard accepted a 4th. What audiences didn't realize, Howard wanted something darker, more ominous, emphasizing the life or death stakes. Horner kept delivering triumphant, heroic music that Howard felt undercut the danger. Their battles became legendary in Hollywood. Horner threatened to walk away and have his name removed. Howard threatened to use temp music instead. The final score is actually a compromise neither man loved. Howard later admitted he was wrong and that Horner's instincts were better. But during production, the fights over music nearly derailed post-production. The beautiful score that elevates the film's emotion almost didn't exist because director and composer had completely opposite visions of what the movie was about. 8. Test audiences hated the documentary style. Ending. The original cut ended with actual Apollo-era footage and interviews with the real astronauts. Ron Howard intended it as a tribute, blending fiction and reality. Test audiences revolted. What audiences didn't know, preview cards were brutal. People felt cheated that the movie suddenly became a documentary. They wanted clean Hollywood closure, not archival footage. Howard was devastated, but had no choice. He cut the documentary ending entirely and replaced it with Tom Hanks's narration over inspirational shots of the astronauts' later lives. The version that worked with audiences was Howard's second choice, created in desperation when his artistic vision failed with regular moviegoers. Sometimes the director's preferred version is the wrong one. This was one of those times. The ending you love exists only because the ending Howard loved bombed with test audiences. 9. The real Marilyn Lovell hated her portrayal. Kathleen Quinlan's Oscar-nominated performance. The real Marilyn Lovell found it offensive. She felt reduced to a hysterical wife when she'd actually been a source of strength and technical knowledge during the crisis. What audiences didn't realize, Lovell refused to participate in publicity for the film and gave interviews criticizing how women were portrayed. She pointed out that NASA wives had engineering backgrounds, understood flight dynamics, and were treated as intellectual partners by their husbands. The film made them look like scared housewives waiting by the phone. Her complaints were buried by Universal's publicity machine. Any journalist who asked about her criticism was told she was just being difficult and that Jim Lovell approved of everything. But her anger was legitimate. The film took a competent, knowledgeable woman and turned her into a weeping stereotype for the sake of traditional gender dynamics that would play better with 1990s audiences. 10. Universal cut a subplot about NASA's black engineers. The original screenplay included scenes featuring black NASA engineers who worked on Apollo missions. Ron Howard shot several scenes showing the diversity of mission control. Universal cut them all. What audiences didn't know, test audiences in certain markets responded negatively to seeing black engineers in positions of authority at 1960s NASA. Studio executives decided those scenes were distracting from the main story and removed them to avoid controversy in southern markets. The film that emerged shows mission control as overwhelmingly white, when the real Apollo program, while still predominantly white, had more diversity than portrayed. Howard later expressed regret, but claimed he had final cut on everything except commercial considerations. Apparently representing actual historical diversity was a commercial consideration worth sacrificing. The film's whitewashed version of NASA became the accepted visual shorthand for the entire space program. And that's just the beginning. We still have explosive revelations about what happened during the splashdown, the awards campaign that turned ugly, and the one fact that even Ron Howard refuses to discuss publicly. Stay with us. 11. The oxygen tank explosion was filmed using real explosives. The moment when the oxygen tank explodes is genuinely dangerous footage. Ron Howard rejected miniatures and digital effects, insisting on practical explosions. What audiences didn't realize, they detonated actual explosives inside a mock-up spacecraft while cameras rolled. The blast was larger than anticipated. Shrapnel hit camera equipment. The shockwave shattered windows on the soundstage. Safety officers nearly shut down production. Howard got his shot, but at a cost. Crew members described it as the scariest moment of filming. The explosion you see isn't visual effects. It's real fire, real force, real danger captured on film. Howard's obsession with authenticity crossed into recklessness. That single shot could have killed someone. It didn't, but it could have. And Howard knew it and did it anyway. 12. Tom Hanks rewrote his own dialogue. Without permission, Hanks's technical dialogue sounds so natural because he wrote much of it himself without telling anyone. What audiences didn't know, he'd study NASA transcripts, find phrases he liked better than the script, and simply perform those instead. Ron Howard usually discovered the changes only when editing. Sometimes he kept them. Sometimes he had to reshoot with the original dialogue because the changes broke continuity. Hanks's unauthorized rewrites caused tension with the screenwriters who felt disrespected. But Hanks argued he was making the dialogue more authentic. The battle between actor and writers went on for months. The compromise was that Hanks could change technical jargon but had to keep emotional beats as written. What you hear isn't always what was scripted. It's Hanks deciding he knew better than the people hired to write words. Sometimes he was right, sometimes he was arrogant. Either way, he did it without asking. 13. The film's PG rating required. Cutting real panic audio. Ron Howard wanted to use actual audio recordings from the Apollo 13 crisis, including moments where astronauts' voices revealed genuine fear. The MPAA threatened a PG-13 rating if he included them. What audiences didn't realize, the sanitized dialogue you hear in the film is far calmer than what was actually said. Real transmissions included profanity, panic, and breakdowns in composure that would have destroyed the heroic image. Howard had to choose between authenticity and a family-friendly rating that would maximize box office. He chose the rating. The astronauts you watch staying calm under pressure were more frightened than the movie shows. Their actual voices, filled with dread and barely controlled terror, were deemed too intense for a PG audience. So history was smoothed over. Fear was edited out. The real emotional stakes were sacrificed to sell more tickets to families. 14. Kevin Bacon's weight loss was medically dangerous. To look like an astronaut, Kevin Bacon dropped 20 pounds through extreme dieting and dehydration. What audiences didn't know, the production's insurance doctors warned him he was risking his health. Bacon ignored them, convinced he needed to look gaunt for the latter scenes showing the astronaut's deterioration. His weight loss regimen included dangerous water-cutting techniques borrowed from wrestlers. On several occasions, he became dizzy on set and nearly fainted. Medical staff monitored him constantly. Ron Howard knew about the health risks, but allowed it because the visual transformation was so effective. You can see Bacon's face become hollow and drawn as the film progresses. That's not makeup. That's a man starving himself for authenticity. The dedication was admirable and reckless in equal measure. 15. The film deliberately ignored the Soviet space program. Apollo 13 presents American space exploration in isolation, never mentioning that the U.S. was racing against the Soviets. This was a deliberate choice by Ron Howard to avoid political complications. What audiences didn't realize, the actual Apollo 13 crisis had international implications. Soviet space officials offered assistance. There were diplomatic communications about potential rescue scenarios. The global context of the space race mattered, but the film erases all of it, presenting NASA as existing in a vacuum. Why? Because in 1995, Hollywood wanted to avoid reminding audiences about Cold War tensions and the military origins of the space program. The movie needed to be pure inspiration, not complicated geopolitics. So an entire dimension of the real story disappeared. The film became American mythology instead of Cold War history. 16. Ed Harris permanently damaged his voice. Ed Harris's intense performance as Gene Kranz came at a physical cost. His constant shouting in the mission control scenes strained his vocal cords so severely he developed nodes. What audiences didn't know, Harris required medical treatment after filming and his voice never fully recovered. He developed a permanent rasp that affected his later roles. Doctors told him to rest his voice completely for months. Harris refused, continuing to do ADR sessions and publicity. His dedication to the role literally changed his voice for life. The commanding bark you hear in Apollo 13 wasn't sustainable. It damaged his instrument permanently. When you hear Ed Harris speak in his later films, you're hearing the aftermath of Apollo 13. The rasp is scar tissue, the legacy of screaming at actors and crew while refusing to break character. He sacrificed part of himself for Gene Kranz. 17. The studio wanted a romantic subplot. Added Universal executives pushed Ron Howard to add a romantic affair subplot, either between astronauts and nurses or involving ground crew. They argued the film was too technical and needed sex appeal. What audiences didn't realize, Howard fought this battle through the entire production. Studio notes kept suggesting ways to add romantic interest to a movie about married men in a life-or-death crisis. The pressure was relentless. Howard refused every time, arguing it would be historically false and tonally wrong. He won by threatening to quit and taking the project to another studio. But the fact that executives even suggested romance in a disaster film shows how little they trusted audiences to care about technical accuracy or pure survival drama. They wanted to sex up a near tragedy. Howard's refusal to compromise on this saved the film's integrity. 18. Splashdown capsule. Sank and nearly drowned. Stunt doubles. During the Pacific Ocean filming, the command module replica sank faster than planned during one take. 3 stunt doubles were inside. What audiences didn't know, the capsule's hatch malfunctioned and wouldn't open from inside. The stunt performers were trapped as water flooded in. Safety divers had to cut through the hull to extract them. All three were hospitalized for water inhalation. The incident was classified as a near-fatal accident in insurance reports, but was never publicly disclosed. Ron Howard halted ocean filming for a week while safety protocols were redesigned. The splashdown you see in the final film was shot after that near drowning, with completely redesigned safety measures. Those scenes carry an extra weight because everyone involved knew they were filming at the site of an almost tragedy. The ocean had nearly claimed 3 lives for the sake of a movie about survival. 19. The awards campaign turned vicious. Apollo 13 was expected to sweep the Oscars but lost Best Picture to Braveheart. What audiences didn't realize, the awards campaign became one of the ugliest in Academy history. Universal ran ads suggesting Braveheart was historically inaccurate, while Apollo 13 was faithful truth. Fox fired back by leaking details about Apollo 13's own historical fabrications. Trade publications ran articles about both films' inventions and distortions. The battle got personal. Mel Gibson and Ron Howard stopped speaking. The ugliness divided Hollywood. When Braveheart won, Howard's acceptance of defeat was professional on camera, but privately bitter. Universal executives blamed Howard for not being aggressive enough in campaigning. Howard blamed them for turning the race toxic and creating backlash. The loss stung more because of how dirty the fight became. Hollywood politics destroyed what should have been a celebration of 2 strong films. 20. NASA used the film to lobby for budget increases. After Apollo 13's success, NASA leadership weaponized the film in congressional budget hearings. What audiences didn't know, they literally screened clips during testimony, arguing that public interest proved space exploration deserved more funding. They used Ron Howard's fictionalized version of events as evidence for real budget needs. This created a bizarre loop where a Hollywood movie became the basis for actual policy arguments. Some congressmen who voted to increase NASA funding cited the film as their inspiration. A movie that took creative liberties with history became the justification for real spending decisions. NASA had helped make the film to rebuild their image. Then they used that rebuilt image to secure money. The film wasn't just entertainment. It was a propaganda tool that generated real budget outcomes. Art didn't imitate life. It funded it. Bonus fact: someone died during production and it was covered up. This is the fact Ron Howard has never discussed publicly. During the zero-gravity flights, a NASA contractor who was operating camera equipment suffered a heart attack mid-flight. He died before the plane could land and get him to a hospital. What audiences have never been told, the production's insurance company classified it as pre-existing condition to avoid liability. The man's family signed a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a settlement. His death was never reported as a production casualty. Itakina didn't appear in any behind-the-scenes documentaries. His name isn't in the credits. He was erased from the film's history. The production that prided itself on authenticity and honoring NASA's heroes covered up the death of a crew member because acknowledging it would have raised questions about safety protocols and insurance costs. Someone gave their life to help make Apollo 13, and the film pretends they never existed. Apollo 13 wasn't just about bringing astronauts home safely. It was about budget battles, historical fabrication, injured cast and crew, and dark secrets that stayed buried for decades. What audiences saw was heroism. What happened behind the cameras was Hollywood at its most ruthless. Sometimes the real story is darker than anything that happened in space.